London dropped its dignity.
Yeah.
So has France and Germany.
Yeah.
All hands are dancing to a raggedy melody full of originality.
Sing it, Paul.
Hello everyone and welcome to Yesterday's Chip Paper, a fortnightly-ish podcast where we live through the pages of old newspapers to find the bizarre, the macabre and the completely absurd from the past few hundred years. I'm Jim.
And I'm Violet, and we're amateur researchers based on opposite sides of the Atlantic who are obsessed with old newspapers and the stories they can tell. But not only just what's in the articles, but also how societal views and reporting styles have changed over the last few centuries.
And I do actually, right at the top of this, just for the context of the people listening. So Violet mentioned that we're transatlantic, and that's because I'm based in New York, and I've recently have moved apartments, and they don't let apartments furnished here. So I don't have any furniture. So my apartment is an echo chamber, so I'm recording this from underneath a duvet. So everything that I say for the next however long, I want you to imagine a grown man in an empty apartment huddled under a duvet like a frightened toddler. That's what I am. I am a 6'1" frightened toddler. So this week is the UCI Road Cycling World Championships in Doha. And cycling is the thing that I'm at the same time most passionate about and most tedious about, I think. So I wanted to find a story that involved bicycles. So, I went through the newspapers and found a lot of stuff on bike thefts and, bicycling being the new passion in Paris on the velocipede and bicycle face and things like this.
What was bicycle face?
So bicycle face was kind of a cautionary thing to try to stop women from riding bikes. I think it was that they would be overstimulated by straddling a saddle, and it wasn't side saddle.
Is there a particular face? I take it
it depends, because if you have... Well, this is it, because...
Surely, they'd look a little bit like, ooh, and that'd be actually quite exciting.
Yeah, no, we don't like women having nice stuff at all, historically. So I think it's partly because it wasn't ladylike, because they would sit side saddle, and partly because they didn't want them having freedom, basically.
Okay, I understand now.
But I can't remember. Let me have a look to see if I can find another article about bicycle face in any of the newspapers. Oh! Have I found a poem? I found a poem of a bicycle face. So this is from. Hang on. This is from the Shields Daily Gazette from Tyne and Wear on the 14th of September 1896, and it is a poem about bicycle face. So I will offer explanation through prose. So, the pleasure of cycling, she warmly declared, are those of the world at its best. Until I possessed a machine of my own, I never could quietly rest. There's naught to compare with the rollicking fun of going downhill at a pace. I thought to the mixture of pathos and fear that's known as the bicycle face. Just imagine, she cried, how lovely it is to own a magnificent steed, which always is ready to carry you forth and never is anxious to feed. You don't want a groom and you don't want a stall, but merely some sort of a place in which you can rest when its labours are over. I thought of the bicycle face. But why don't you answer and tell me you will go straight to an agent's and buy a bike for yourself? What, you say that you won't? I'm really too angry to cry. The engagement is off. Bah! A fig for the love, which was really uncommonly base. I can bear it as pleasure, I stammered, but dear, I can't wear a bicycle face. She left and did not attempt to restrain, for her trouble was long overdue. But I mentally cussed the dissolute thing in words that were chosen and few. I launched out at bloomers and masculine girls who nobody wise would embrace, then stopped of a sudden in chilly despair. She'd passed with a bicycle face. So it sounds like that man
really hated women on bicycles.
Was left. Well, I mean, so just to adjust my duvet studio. So yes, so based on the bike theme that I was working on this week for the big story, I found a number of these cases, nude lunatics on bicycles and poems about bicycle face and things. But then what I did come across, which was a huge deal at the time, but I've never heard of, and I'm sure a lot of people will think I'm an idiot for not having heard of this, was something called the Green Bicycle Murder, which was this huge sensation around 1919 and the early 1920s, which was a murder in Leicestershire. So I have gone through dozens of articles and accounts and things, and it's really sort of an incredible case because of the reality of it not being even remotely close to what the newspaper has reported. And the story's kind of got everything. It's got, a villain. It's got it's got a victim, obviously, but it's also got like this super barrister who was like, a national sort of icon. So I've written up a thing on the Green Bicycle murder that isn't entirely from the newspapers, because honestly, you couldn't tell the story just using newspapers. It is, and you'll see why. I mean, this will make sense. And I would also just like to say that when I put Green Bicycle murder into Google, I got a Google shopping link to the Doors Lightning Sport road bike. So I'll probably avoid buying one of those. So this is what happened. So on July the 5th, 1919, a woman called Bella Wright, who was called Bella Wright, was what everyone called her. She was murdered by someone, and I'm making air quotes around someone, which is wasted because it isn't a visual format, but I'm definitely making air quotes. She was in a village called Little Stretton in Leicestershire. And the chronology is basically, she meets a man while she's out riding her bicycle, to her uncle's, and asks him if she has a spanner for her freewheel, because her freewheel was loose. The man was called Ronald Light, and there'll be a lot more on him shortly. Light didn't have a spanner, but he offered to accompany Bella on the journey she was taking, and she accepted the offer, which I don't understand why. If he's not a useful mechanic, if he isn't a useful mechanic, I can't fix your bike, but I will walk next to you while you
Maybe
walk
if he
it.
was like carrying her or something.
So
that makes sense.
Or carrying
the bike.
The bike, maybe. I don't know. No, he didn't do that. He didn't do that. I don't. Listen, we can't question the logic of 1919.
I mean, this was a time when she really shouldn't have been on a bicycle anyway, as a woman.
I mean, there are no reports as to her face. Yeah, we don't know what her face was like. No, but this is the thing, and there'll be more on this later, but for all the accounts of her, she seems amazing, and that's what makes this case even more tragic, and the way that it was reported and the way that it went through the courts.
Not very wise, though, by the sounds of things.
Do you know what? Reserve judgment. So she stops by her uncle's house to pick some stuff off to see her uncle. And her uncle said that he didn't like the look of Ronald Light. And she said to her uncle that she would shake him off. She said, yeah, no, I'll get rid of him. And she left her uncle's at 8:50. And then at 9:20, half an hour later, they found her body.
Hell.
And her head was covered in blood. Yeah, like 30 minutes. Her head was covered in blood. Honestly, it's bonkers. And they assumed it was a bike crash. And they took her to the coroners and everything. But this policeman, this constable, Alfred Hall, he thought it was all a bit odd. So he went back to the crime scene, this pathway, and found a bullet in the ground. And so he went back and he washed Bella's face, and he found a bullet hole just under her left eye.
I feel like
which the coroner missed.
Is that
the coroner
not,
said
quite easy to spot?
Yeah. Should we wash her face now? Fuck it. So the coroner missed it. All I can think is maybe it was just like it was a small town, so the guy was just like, no, it's quite unlikely they would.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the real coroner was killed in the war or something. But then Constable Hall also found blood on a nearby gatepost, which he said came from a raven that had gorged itself to death on Bella's blood, which is obviously, no, I mean obviously that's fucking amazing, but
it's kind of great.
It's also just. It's such nonsense. It honestly is such nonsense. I don't know why he added that. I don't know if he was just like, I better make this as metal as fuck. But anyway, so the hunt for the murderer, this is reported in the news, was basically they were going after the bloke who was riding the green bicycle, which I called the Green Bicycle Murdered. And that was Ronald Light. He was riding, a BSA Deluxe. So the news went around, the suspect was this green bicycle chap. And a lot of papers reported that he was the man to look out for. The 28th of July, which obviously quite a bit after the murder, but when they reported on the inquest, the Aberdeen Journal said that the inquest on Bella Wright, 21, a rubber worker who was found murdered in a country lane near Leicester on July 5th, was resumed on Friday at Leicester. Medical evidence was given that the girl was probably shot from a distance of 4 or 5 yards while walking or riding a bicycle found beside her body. There was no trace of assault. The inquest was further adjourned. The Chief Constable of Leicester made an appeal to the public to come forward with particulars of a man with a green bicycle seen with deceased on the night of the tragedy. The Scotland Yard hunt had been fruitless up to the present. So there were reports that somebody fitting Light's description had taken a green BSA into a bike shop in Leicester. Well, that's all sketchy. On On July the 11th, 1919, Sunderland Daily Echo and Shipping Gazette reported that no arrest has yet been made in connection with the murder of Miss Bella Wright, who was found shot in a country lane near Leicester on Saturday. But the local police have made an important discovery that may lead to the tracing of the supposed murderer. A man answering the description of the cyclist who was seen in the girl's company had a bicycle repaired at a shop in Leicester. Fetching it on the morning of the tragedy, he told the repairer that he'd come from London. And there's also reports of this happening in Tottenham as well. But the owner of the bike shop was out.
Oh,
and it was his wife.
Wait, another murder happening in Tottenham, or another?
No, just another green bike, the green bike being brought into a bike shop. So Bella, so what I was saying about Bella is that she sounds amazing. All of the newspapers and all of the modern reporting actually really focuses on the fact that she was one of 7. She was the daughter of a cow herder.
I thought you were going to say daughter of a cow.
She was the daughter of a cow, and the cow was illiterate. But no, her parents were illiterate. She lived in a ramshackle cottage. You know, she was every single report just calls her like a rubber worker, a factory girl. But that was kind of just her job. You know, she was the daughter of a cow herder. During the First World War, she realised that cow herding was, for chumps, there's no money in it, and that factories are where the money and freedom were. So she went and worked in, I think, the Dunlop rubber factory, who made bike tyres actually. But she sounds like, honestly, when you look at sources that aren't newspapers, she sounds like someone that you'd like to go drinking with. She's cool. So when this happened, she was courting one guy. She had another suitor. She rode a bike everywhere. Now she sounds amazing. She sounds like a lot of fun. But anything that is a newspaper from the period, the reporting of her was just.
I was going to say that it's weird that they didn't make more of the fact that she was such an incredible sounding person, but I guess in the 1920s or whenever it was, that wouldn't have been a good thing. Well,
this is it. This is basically trial by the British class system. So I need to give you background on Ronald Light, and this is the bit that I was saying isn't reported in the newspaper. None of this was reported in the newspaper, and Ronald Vivian Light was this really broken, unpleasant sort of mess of a guy and a really, really long history of really sketchy stuff. So this is basically his background. In 1902, he was expelled from school, aged 17, for lifting an 8-year-old girl's clothes over her head. This is in 1902, so times were different in 1902, and he still was expelled for this. In his 20s, he tried to have sex with a 15-year-old and touched an 8-year-old inappropriately. Even on the day of Bella's murder, he was chasing 2 underage girls through the countryside. I think that wasn't to give them gifts or anything.
That's awful.
That's on the day of the murder, and none of this was in the newspapers. He was fired from his job on the railways because they suspected him of setting fire to a fucking cupboard and writing lewd graffiti everywhere. He got fired from a farm for setting hay bales on fire. His dad killed himself because Ronald was such a bad son. And his mother, that's genuinely almost a direct quote. His mother said that his mother said he killed himself for worrying about his son or something like that. Yeah.
How did he get that way?
This was all before the First World War.
Even his parents thought he was terrible.
I don't know. Honestly,
just fucked up.
He just wasn't right, I suppose. Yeah. And then the First World War comes along. His dad was the relatively successful inventor of plumbing equipment, and Ronald went into the Royal Engineers as an officer. I think he went in as a lieutenant. Halfway through the war, he loses his commission. There's no reports as to why that was that I can find. And then he joins the Honourable Artillery Company for the remainder of the war, comes back half deaf and shell-shocked. So he was already kind of not completely right. And then he came back completely ruined by that war. So, I mean, luckily when he got back, sorry, not luckily, he got a job as a teacher when he got back in a school in Cheltenham as a maths teacher. I mean, I guess then it was the sort of vetting process was if you ever touch any kids?
No.
It's just nope. Who can check? No, but
well, apparently you don't find it in the newspapers, so
nope,
shoddy workmanship, those journalists.
So the reason that I say all this about him is because this background you just won't find in the newspapers, and he almost definitely did this killing. I don't think you can slander the dead. I don't think you can. If you can slander the dead, edit this bit out. I don't want to be sued by the Light estate, but the press didn't say any of this. between the press and Light's barrister, who's the super barrister, Sir Edward Marshall Hall, they kept this story out of the case entirely, which means that the representation of him in the press was a former officer in the Royal Engineers, or a schoolmaster, or an officer in the Honourable Artillery Company, or a war hero. So
That's
there were all
so
these
messed
examples
up.
of it's so messed up. And so these are some examples that I found. So the Dis Express, which is a fucking brilliant name for a newspaper, from the 11th of June 1920, says right. So Green Bicycle Mystery.
I don't feel like there's much of a mystery here.
No,
Journalistic license.
So this is, well, I found a lot of examples of kind of the class prejudice in the reporting of how Bella and Ronald were described. And, you know, there's ones like this. This is from the Dis Express, and it is a Dis, but this is from the Dis Express on the 11th of June 1920. And it really is, bear in mind, Ronald Light, like, fairly prolific low-level sex offender. Ronald Light, the headline is Green Bicycle Mystery. Ronald Light, this is how they describe him, age 35, the Bachelor of Science and ex-captain in the Royal Engineers, who was under arrest on the charge of murdering Bella Wright, the factory girl, on July 5th last year, will be tried at Leicestershire Assizes before Mr. Justice Horridge. It is understood that the trial will last several days, and it is expected that the sensational disclosures will be made. And the reason I haven't stopped reading this article just yet is because it ends, Sir Marshall Hall, KC, will defend, assisted by Mr. Whiteman Powers. Marshall Hall's assistant was called Whiteman Powers, which I didn't know we had powers, but I think Whiteman Powers helped in this case.
I wonder how many lawyers do you think he had to go through before he found the guy with the name that he needed?
What do you call black man strength? No, I don't need that. So,
Factory girl goodness.
what are you, whorish local? So they described Light as the science, the Bachelor of Science and the ex-captain. He's referred to as the Bachelor of Science in a lot of articles, charged with murdering the factory girl. And then again, the Western Times on the 18th of March of 1920 has a short article on Light being charged and remanded. And it says, Bachelor of Science again remanded on murder charge, and introduces him as Ronald Light, BSc. You know, I don't even think that one talks about Bella. And actually, the Western Times is a really interesting source of this story anyway. Like, they seem like intent that nothing happened. So they ran a story on the 31st of March 1921 about two boys carving their initials into a tree at the murder site, and discovering a bullet lodged into the tree at the murder site, which, and I quote from the article, was handed over to police and found to be the same size as the one that killed Miss Wright. The discovery is not expected to throw any more light on the mystery. I was like, oh no, yeah, fuck it, yeah. These are just everywhere.
I just go around shooting my gun, just casual.
Yeah, I was gonna fire my gun in some trees. But the person before was like carving their name into the tree, but they just got as far as like a full stop. I'm like, oh fuck it. So the Dundee Courier on the 12th of July 1919 reported on Bella's funeral and just called her the girl cyclist, which is just like honestly such a heartbreaking summary of somebody's life, you know. So I think that he got away with murder because of the British class system, and now the newspapers are a good. The newspapers basically report on how he did it or how he tried to do it. Oh no, he did it, I guess. So I'll give you an article that gives a bit of a summary, and then I'll tell you what the context is. On the 6th of March 1920, the Dundee Courier ran an article, and the big headline, was "Canal Gives Up Secret."
Here you go.
The subheader.
Sorry. I just had a really weird image in my head. The canal light came to life.
It's just like, your wife's having an affair.
Sorry, I can edit that bit out. It's getting late over here. This is the Atlantic difference.
And then the subheader is Green Bicycle Murder Mystery. And then the subheader, because he used to do that a lot, developed after 9 months. Like a baby. Oh. So the recovery of a green bicycle... The canal gives up a baby.
You have to take all the goodness you can out of these reports, because it's just so horrible.
The recovery of a green bicycle from a canal near Leicester led to the appearance there yesterday afternoon of Ronald Light, aged about 30, that is lazy as fuck. A mathematical master of Cheltenham, charged with willfully murdering Bella Wright, 22, they got her age, at Stretton,
she was
Leicestershire
21
on July 5th last. Yeah, I think she'd be 22 when this article's written, so I don't know how they think age works. Yeah, Ronald Light stopped her being 22. The arrest is a new development in a famous crime mystery of last summer. Scotland Yard took up the case, but no clue to the fugitive's whereabouts came until a few days ago when a boatman found a green bicycle in a canal near Long Eaton on the borders of Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire. It was handed over to the Leicester County Police, and Detective Superintendent Taylor, as a result of the investigations at the BSA works in Birmingham, went to Cheltenham, where he arrested a man at the school where he was a teacher. Detective Superintendent Taylor at Leicester Police Court yesterday deponed, I don't know what that word is, that when he arrested the accused, he asked Light what had become of the green bicycle he was known to have had. He at first denied possession of one, but afterwards admitted that he had bought one at Derby, which he said he'd sold years ago. When later informed that a cycle repairer of Leicester named Cox had identified him as the man who left the bicycle for repair, Light said, "I never was there." When charged, he replied, "It is absurd." So what he'd done, right, is...
Go on.
And he eventually admitted this. So after the incident when he was seen with Bella, he took the bike home, where he lived with his mother and a housekeeper. And he left the bike there for, I think it was like 5 months. He kept the bike in the house just sort of hidden until the heat died down a bit. And then he dismantled the bike, filed off all the serial numbers, threw it in the canal, along with the holster for a service revolver and some bullets, which were the same caliber that killed Bella.
That
So this
fucking
innocent man
tricky
who
bastard,
had nothing
though.
to do with it.
Like, if you think what date was
trying-
this? 1919. Because, like, to think of all of that back when policing wasn't even that good, to like get rid of the serial
that's because
numbers and like wait 5 months.
But that's how they got him, was because he didn't file one of them off well enough. So he didn't even do that well enough. Like, the man's just a complete fuckwit. But there's also the service revolver holster and some bullets, which were the same caliber that killed Bella, and the holster was for a revolver that were taking those bullets. You know, so this is guilty McGiltson. Like, you can't really get much more guilty looking than this. So it goes to trial, and Mr. Justice Horridge, the prosecutor, says, you know, what are you doing? And Light says that he hid the bike to avoid causing his mother any stress, which, if my kid was a murderer, I would be quite stressed. And he was questioned on this a lot. But even then, the reporting just seems like really pally. You know, these are gentlemen, and all. He just killed a local. Actually, just as a digression, I read an article on, I think it was bicycling.com, about this murder, where an American journalist flies to the UK. It's quite a good article, actually. But he interviews a local historian, and this quote, I think, sums up how Bella was treated then and continues to be viewed. The local historian didn't believe that Light was guilty, and the journalist says, "Well, why would somebody kill her then?" And the journalist says, "Maybe she was the local nail," which means maybe everybody was banging her.
Oh.
And it's just like, like he would rather believe that she just pissed some bloke off, or some bloke found out that she was cheating on him, than believe that somebody like Ronald Light would have just randomly shot her.
And that was totally fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the thing. That was the one where I was like, Jesus Christ, that was like 2012 articles written. You know, we haven't progressed in 90 years. But the best report that I could find on the trial, there's a really long report, actually, from the Leeds Mercury. I won't read all of it. From the 12th of June, 1920. And Light stated that he hadn't heard anything of the murder until the following Tuesday. And then, and this is a quote, became aware that police were anxious to find the man who owned the green bicycle, but he did not go to the police because everyone associated the owner of the green bicycle with the crime. For good fucking reason, Ronald, because you did it. So this is what he said the reason was. Justice Horridge said, "Don't you see," this is quoted from the newspaper, "don't you see that if you had gone to the police with the true story, if it was true, you would have put the police off a false scent and enabled them to look elsewhere for the man wanted?" To which Light responded, "I see that now, my lord, but I did not deliberately decide not to come forward. I was so astonished and frightened that I kept hesitating, and in the end did nothing at all." Which is a total untruth, because he didn't do nothing at all. He dismantled his bicycle, filed off all the serial numbers, and threw it in the fucking canal, which is actually quite active, I think, rather than doing nothing at all. But I didn't do it itself. And then he said, "There was an unpleasant publicity about it, which I shrank from, and I failed to realise what a difficult position I was getting myself in. The judge," and this is where it gets like really matey, "you could have given information to the police saying you were all wrong about this green bicycle. Don't you see now that it would have been of immense value to the police? Prisoner, I see it now." He admitted receiving on July 11th a letter from his mother at Rill, in which occurred the sentence, "What is the news at home? We are interested in the bicycle mystery," but did not tell her about himself because she was the last one he wanted to know about it, as it was to save her worry that he did not come forward. "She would naturally have been greatly worried, the same as I was," added prisoner. He admitted putting the bicycle into the box room to evade identification and filing off the number for the same reason. And explaining his statements to the police after the arrest, he said he had drifted into a policy of concealment and had to go on with it, adding, "I said anything to gain time till I could get some advice." With reference to the fact that prisoner made no statement when brought before the magistrates, the judge observed, "If a prisoner merely sits tight and says, 'I will wait until I am tried,' I think very often he is a wise man." Re-examined, prisoner said his mother had had a good deal of trouble and was in poor health. His father, this is good, his father was killed by falling out of a window, and he, the prisoner, had been the cause of great expense to his mother. So they don't even, his mother was even like, yeah, the dad killed himself out of worry about the son. And even the newspapers are like, yeah, he fell out of a window.
The whole thing is just so ridiculous.
So it's such bullshit. So the prosecutor said in closing that Light had lied about the bike, lied about the gun, lied about the rounds. The rounds used to kill Bella were the same as those.
Does
in Light's
he not
revolver.
see that if he had not just told the truth about those things, rather than, I like how he's just like, oh, well, you should have told us at the time that you weren't guilty, rather than this all makes you guilty as fuck.
Wasting all this money. God, Ronald. So, yeah, so he lied about the bike, lied about the gun. The rounds used to kill Bella were the same as those in Light's revolver. It was confirmed that Light was the man seen with Bella on the night she died, and Light had gone to great lengths to hide the evidence of a crime he claimed he hadn't committed. So all this is like have you seen that episode of Blackadder where Blackadder's convicted of something and there's a lawyer who's like, the barrister gets people off when he got a bloke off who's stabbed somebody in the street. And he's holding a knife covered in blood and shouting, "I'm glad I killed that bastard." And he gets indicted in the New Year's honours list. That's what Sir Edward Marshall Hall does here. So Hall's defence is bonkers. He basically shouted at a gunsmith until a gunsmith admitted that the shot could have come from a rifle, meaning it could have been a stray round from a hunter. So putting doubt in the mind of the jury. And especially as the jury wanted to believe that this not upper class, but sort of this gentleman wouldn't be guilty of such a base crime. And then his closing focused on the motive. The two were strangers, and so he claimed there couldn't be a motive because they were strangers. And you think, why did nobody in the prosecution mention his past offences?
Did they know about them?
Bad behaviour, and I don't know. Like, it doesn't, because it's not reported in the newspapers. I'm sure a better researcher than me could find something, but I haven't found anything. And there's a really weird bit of the article, and it's like a subheader in the article, all in capital letters, and the subtitle it just says sex domination.
In what context?
That's in quotations, yeah. Right? So that's in quotations. And Sir Edward Marshall Hall, KC, and meeting with girl, said on the meeting with the girl, coming to the prisoner's chance meeting with Miss Wright, Sir Edward Marshall Hall observed, "Women may pretend to be more manly." This is bonkers. "Women may pretend to be more manly, and men may possibly become more effeminate, but you will never get rid of the power of sex. It dominates the world, and it will go on dominating it."
What was the what was he trying to say?
Fuck, I don't know. Maybe that's why Ronald Light was following Bella around. I think he's saying he didn't walk with her because he wanted to kill her. He walked with her because he wanted to, whatever they did in the 1900s, like feel her hair. So the jury found Light not guilty, even though he did it. He definitely did it. Probably the worst bit about all of it is that it was a massively popular result. There were hundreds of people outside the courtroom. The courtroom itself went crazy, cheering and congratulating him.
Fucking hell.
The Tamworth Herald reported it under a headline that included the words "jury's long deliberation." That at Leicester Assizes, Ronald Vivian Light, 34, but there's no consistency with his age. 34 was acquitted of murdering Annie Bella Wright, a Leicester factory hand. There it is again. The jury, after an absence of 3 hours, were asked by the judge if there was any chance of agreement, and the foreman replied that he hoped so in about 10 minutes. They retired again, and after 5 minutes later came back with a verdict of not guilty. So this headline says "long deliberation" in capitals, I think, and then reports that it took 3 hours and 5 minutes. And not only that, but the foreman managed to get it wrapped up in half the added time he asked for. And I checked, and 3 hours and 5 minutes isn't even long enough to watch the entirety of Titanic. Like, it's probably a long time to be on fire, but I don't think it's a long time to deliberate over a murder verdict.
But they weren't all decided, were they? Were they all decided?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I imagine it was just like...
Were they all white men?
Just...
Probably.
Oh, I don't know. Someone probably went to fucking school with him. So the article goes on. There was no doubt it was a popular verdict, and Light received the congratulations of many men and women in the court. And then he just slipped out of a side door. And then he lived, I think, till about 83, 87, something like that. And he had another family. They didn't know about this. His stepdaughter or daughter didn't find out about this until she was a grown adult.
Oh.
And I think after he died. And he used to just apparently... He moved to the countryside and would just like stand at the end of his path, leaning on his gate, smoking a pipe, and watching people go past. Probably just being like, "They're too old to catch you now."
Oh, you're lucky this time.
But
I were a young whippersnapper
But
again.
I don't know where you think people in England are from, but that's not what...
I have no idea where this guy was from.
Did you just grow up watching fucking Last of the Summer
Pretty
Wine
much,
or
yeah.
whatever? No, not Last of the Summer Wine. What was it?
Yeah,
Darling
yeah,
Buds of
yeah.
May. That's all you get in Tasmania. That's just got there. So this is the postscript. This is the metal as fuck postscript. There's a headline that was just what newspaper is it from? I'm not sure what newspaper it's from. So the headline is "Barrister and the Blood-Gorged Raven," which is probably the finest headline I've ever read. And the article is, although the trial in what is known as the Green Bicycle case is over, and Ronald Light, charged with the murder of Bella Wright, has been acquitted, the case is still a topic of argument and theory. Yesterday, 2 correspondents wrote to the Mail, advancing fresh possible solutions of the mystery. The first comes from a barrister who said he does not believe the girl was murdered at all. She was shot in the head. He suggests that the key to the mystery... She was shot in the head. He suggests that the key to the mystery is the dead raven found gorged with blood in a field near to the body.
Just every time you say that. Ugh.
Well, I'm going to go into some science in a second, so fasten your seatbelts. In a field near the body, in which had left traces of blood on the top of a gate adjoining the road. The barrister says, "I doubt very much whether this creature was in reality gorged with human blood," says the barrister. "On the contrary, it seems to me improbable that it was shot, not improbable, sorry, that it was shot by a boy or some other irresponsible person, and the bullet went on and killed Miss Wright. I should like to know whether it is a scientific fact that a raven may so gorge itself with human blood as to die." The other correspondent asks by whom the raven was examined and also expresses doubt whether it gorged itself until it died. "It is far more likely," he said, "that the bird was shot and bled internally." So I did some research on this, and it is more likely that it was caught by a stray bullet because they don't have lips. So apparently they can't gorge themselves to death because they can't force the liquid into themselves. And
that's really good research, man.
If I die tonight, make sure you have "Do ravens have lips?" deleted from my search. But also, I mean, what it probably means is that I don't believe that it was a hunter's rifle that killed her, because I imagine they're higher caliber.
I don't believe that a bullet went through a raven and then hit her and killed them both.
No, I don't believe that. I think maybe Ronald Light just shot.
I mean, this isn't Emily. I was thinking happenstance.
It's topical. When we're saying topical, none of this is topical. But I also checked, and there are no ravens in this part of the country.
But
so
why was it there then?
Someone's talking shit.
Oh, so it wasn't there?
I don't know. Probably wasn't. It's probably a fucking cat or something. I have absolutely no idea. I can't get to the bottom of the fucking raven.
That's so weird.
But apparently there's none in the Midlands. Anyway, so that's the Green Bicycle case, and it became actually a novelisation in the end. It became a novel. The Strand magazine, a few years later, this is reported in Ballymena Observer, I think. Yeah, the Ballymena Observer on the 3rd of February 1922. Everyone remembers the trial and acquittal of Ronald. They called him Roland Light. That's amazing. But the mystery remains who shot Bella Wright. Mr. Humphreys here puts forward, after a most careful investigation in the novel form of mingled fact and fiction, his theory of what actually occurred. This theory is a most ingenious one and is bound to attract widespread attention. Now that the Bournemouth murder... Oh, there must have been another murder in Bournemouth. The Bournemouth murder has aroused so much public interest on the subject of unsolved mysteries. The thing about that is that Light's trial was a novel form of mingled facts and fiction, because it was all bollocks. And Bella Wright's killer was never found because she was poor.
That's so sick.
It's really fucking horrible, actually, because you see pictures of her and she was just like a normal person. You know, she was just cool, a bit of a sort of a bit edgy. Like I think she sounds amazing, and he was bonkers. He was just criminally unpleasant.
Did he commit any more crimes afterwards?
Well, I don't know.
I guess not that were reported.
Well, quite, but it's hard to imagine that would have been his last sort of. Because I did read a theory that because she wasn't interfered with sexually, so I think there's a theory that he pushed her off a bike and stood over her and shot her in the head because she rebuffed his advances or something. But we'll literally never know. We'll never know.
That's so terrible. But also, that was a really good one.
It is a good one, and it's just a kind of a good demonstration of how newspapers could be an incredible resource and how they can also be incredibly flawed. Because you just can't find the truth in this story.
See,
but you can find a lot of really interesting reportage.
I've got a story for the next episode where I actually can't find the story outside of the newspapers. So it'll be really interesting to see, actually. Well, I won't be able to see, but I wonder how much of it is entirely true, because it's a surreal story, and it's It's nuts.
Well, this is it. When you read like the old chat books or you read the Police Illustrated news, and it's like, is this true?
Because I guess there's no Google. There's no easy way to like in those days they wouldn't know if a journalist was just going off on one.
No, and that's how fucking Roland Light, as he's now known, kept getting jobs, because they were just like, have you had any bad behaviour around children in the past? And he was like, you're going to check? And they were like, nope. And he was like, well,
the reason everyone was so happy when he got out was probably because of what they'd read in the papers, because none of those people probably
100%.
would have even known him. So that would have been the only way they would have found out.
And there have been two books. There have been two books written about this. One nearer the time and one quite recently, and they have completely opposing. One says he's guilty, one says he's innocent. I just don't know. I mean, he did it. He did it. I don't know if that's slander, but he did it. But yeah. One of the other things that we really like about old newspapers, and actually modern newspapers, is the letters to the editor, which are a really sort of a really good way of looking at what people were concerned about in different periods in history, but also just stunning racism, like really like YouTube comment racism and xenophobia and bigotry about everything.
It's funny that would be the first thing that you mentioned, because racism is actually rife in one of the letters I'm going to point out today. I
would have been honestly annoyed if there wasn't racism in one of these, but yes, so each episode we'll have a look at kind of like a best of, like a now that's what I call racism of
maybe that's what we should call this segment.
Now that's what I call racism. Maybe we should do a spin-off podcast. Now that's what I call racism. that would do so well in my hometown. Oh, that is what I call racism. So yeah, so each episode we'll have a look at some of these highlights, lowlights, very much lowlights. And this week, Violet, you've had a look. What have you found?
Okay, so this week I have found a man named Norman, which is probably it's the name I would choose if I was writing about a fictional racist. But this is actually a real racist.
I think there's probably a disproportionate number of Normans in the inbox for these editors.
So this letter is from the Western Morning News in 1947, and it's about the increasing population, which seems, it's an interesting thing to be worried about in 1947.
There was quite a recent significant decrease in the population.
But apparently that wasn't enough of a decrease for poor old Norman. So
Norman needs more.
He said, Sir, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. And if we are not all already heading for the hatch, our rulers bid fair to turn us into a nation of spineless cranks. At once vegetarians, teetotalers, non-smokers, dress reform addicts, Diogenes and troglodytes, fresh air faddists, with suicidal drafts and no fires, walking tour obsessionists and queue compulsion neurotics, which I feel is a comprehensive list.
So he thinks that because he started that with about madness. Does he think that non-smokers are mad, or does he just think we're all pansies because we don't drink tar?
I think he's trying to suggest that non-smokers are big breeders. I don't know, all these healthy people. He's very against
fresh air and their
the old health, our Norman. But he goes on to say the inclusion of sex maniacs in the list would perhaps be rather excessive. But nevertheless, the socialists are certainly encouraging us to multiply indiscriminately. Which
I think don't stop there. Don't be a pussy about it, Norman. I think you could equate vegetarians and sex maniacs.
But anyway, so he goes on and on and on, and I'm not going to read it all. But so then he just signs off Norman Birchett, Red Gables, Bude. So I actually then looked up Red Gables to see just where it was, because I didn't even know where Bude was. So it's a nursing home now, which I was a bit disappointed to find out that it wasn't in 1947, because I kind of had an amazing image of this Norman just sitting in his nursing home writing to the Western Morning News rather.
Hang on, what was it in the 1940s then if it wasn't
it was it looks like a big ancient farmhouse, which it basically was. They had I did find also in the newspapers actually that there was a man who lived there who I think he was a lawyer.
That definitely wasn't Norman.
But he held some sort of farming events where, I don't know, they looked at livestock and things, I think. But
They
I
looked
don't,
at livestock.
I don't quite know. It's very late here. This is about 5 minutes ago that I found this. But
Okay. I'm under a duvet, of course.
yeah, so I mean, like, the standards are already quite high. But yeah, so this guy who was a lawyer, he lived there, and he was always looking for new servants. And this was during World War II. He kept asking for servants who didn't have to sign up to war, who were exempt.
So women. Oh, hang on.
No,
I see.
he'd be like
Okay.
a servant boy who's exempt from being called up.
I like them deaf.
And one of the ads was like, oh, looking for a housemaid, but not too young.
Was one of them like looking for miserable old fucking racist?
Yeah, he's just looking for. I think it was basically a Lonely Hearts ad, but he was just trying his luck because like the turnover seemed to be massive.
Oh.
Like it was every few months they were looking for new servants, and then he died in 1942, I think, and there's no record of what happened in that house until 1949, when it was sold by his lawyers. So some time period between 1942 and 1949, Norman lived there. And I tried to see if he was like a servant or something, and I couldn't find out why he was there in between that time.
I think I figured out why Norman is so averse to the population growing, and that's because people want their houses back.
Ah, I see. Maybe he's a squatter. Norman the squatter.
Yeah, not as many houses for Norman now.
Anyway, so I wrote down a couple of extracts from. It's kind of like the best bits of Norman. Norman's best bits.
No, that's what I call Norman.
So he wrote one. This is, I think, why he had so many letters published by the Western Morning News, because he wrote this one. This was one of the first ones that he had published, where he said, "Sir, it is with a great sense of relief that one turns each day from perusal of the awful balderdash in the popular London press, with its admixture of transparent propaganda and poppycock, to the pages of your newspaper, which bear the unmistakable stamp of a grave, wise thoughtfulness and truth." And he puts down the terrible stories being published in the popular press, with a public so cowed and regimental during the war years that they'll swallow any old bilge water. So that was one of his first letters, and so they were kind of obliged to publish everything else that he wrote, which included a note on the problem of disposal of the 3 Nazis acquitted at I've written down the name of a court, but I can't read my handwriting.
Is it Nuremberg?
Yeah, Nuremberg. That's the one. So he says that one of the Nazis should have been especially welcome and given, say, 5,000 clothing coupons, priority chocolate dockets as a VIP, and the Governor Generalship of the Bank of England.
I think that Norman would have voted leave.
Oh, well, I don't know, because he has a great description of Europe.
Oh, really?
This was how he described Europeans. The terrible Neanderthal strain in modern continental Homo sapiens is afforded additional proof, if such were needed, by the gruesome catalogue of framed trials and liquidations of riots and murders, rape and decapitations, almost everywhere prevalent in Europe, always excepting the Scandinavian countries, who know the value of minding their own business.
Hang on.
He really loves Scandinavia.
Vikings were Scandinavian.
Yeah, but he had another letter where he also went on about Scandinavians being really cool. So I don't know who he knew, but he knew someone Scandinavian, and they must have been great.
It's just like you one Scandinavian.
But there's one last letter that he wrote, which is my favourite of all of the ones that he wrote. It came under the headline, "A Pavement Quiz." And he says, "Sir, badgered to distraction by the ever-mounting volume of official forms, questionnaires, and other presumptuous demands for intimate details respecting their private lives, it is with pardonable irritation that many people resent being accosted in the streets by expensively dressed young women who, with notebooks and pencils poised, alight from equally expensive motor cars and attempt to extract similar irrelevant data for broadcasting by the BBC." He got badgered by a lot of young women for his views. This was basically the early days of Vox Pops.
Wait, imbued? No, he did not
Apparently
imbued.
Norman was a bit of a babe magnet in 1948
Hmm.
because he kept getting endlessly badgered. So that is all I have
That's not as
for this
racist
week.
as I'd hoped that Norman would get. I mean, it seems that he's just plagued by the pitfalls of celebrity, which, in fairness, Norman, stop writing to the Western Morning
I know, he's basically,
News.
like, he is a vlogger. He's making his own fame.
He is Katie Hopkins.
I'm surprised he didn't
Wow.
have, like, makeup companies sending him samples and things, getting him to write how great they were. Maybe Scandinavians did. Maybe that's why he loved Scandinavia so much. He had the tourist board.
It's just like a house full of licorice and elk vodka.
So that's all from us for this time, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks or so with more from yesterday's Chip Papers. Links to all of the archives used for the researching of this podcast can be found in the episode notes. The song is International Rag, performed by Sophie Taylor and Al Jolson, with thanks to the Free Music Archive.
They call the Spanish tango. Dukes and lords and Russian czars, men who own their motor cars, throw up their shoulders to that raggedy melody full of originality. Italian opera singers have learned to snap their fingers. Give it on, baby. The world goes round to the sound of the international. The international rag.